All right, hello Honors 410 students. So the class is now moving into workshop mode. Your classmates have now submitted our first three workshop submissions. I'll be uploading those as a file to the folder of readings for this class. So I'm planning to just title it something like Workshop Pieces 1, and I'll kind of consolidate all of those submissions into one PDF file. As a reminder, everyone who submitted today did a good job with this. I do appreciate if you could please submit as a Word document or something similar, something that's easy to edit, because my tentative plan is to always just kind of copy all of these into one file and make them into a PDF for our workshop submissions, just to make it easier for everyone else to in the class to be able to track which submissions we're looking at in a given day and not have multiple readings they're trying to bounce between in terms of files that they're looking at. So please continue setting them in an editable form, ideally as a Word document, and I'll continue uploading them as one big PDF. Big thanks to our first students going this workshop process. First of all, for just kind of being the guinea pigs in this process. I know it's hard to be the first to go in a process like this, so I appreciate you taking one for the team, for the class in doing that, and also in setting those in early. It is really helpful to have those a little early on my end so I can get them posted for the whole class in time for that actual class session. Again, your actual due date official deadline for them is 1 p.m. on that class day when we would have had class. But if you can get them in a little bit early, to me, again, that facilitates me getting them posted earlier. I'm tentatively planning that this is going to be my last video lecture for a little while for this class, because kind of the spirit of the workshop process is it's a very student-driven discussion. And so I'll definitely be in the discussion board and responding to comments and obviously giving you credit for your comments in those discussions. But for me to kind of record a video lecture about the pieces would sort of defeat the purpose of doing this as a workshop process. So rest assured, I still will weigh in with some degree of feedback and kind of be actively moderating those discussions as they go on Canvas. And I will also be giving some good written comments to each of the students as well. And I'm happy to discuss those more with students if anything I post in my own comments is unclear. But just to kind of talk a little more about what's coming up for the class. So again, students will be submitting according to the schedule that we have posted to Canvas, and then I'll get those uploaded as PDFs. So you'll have at least a couple days between when those have been uploaded and when our next class session will be, so you can weigh in on that discussion of the pieces. So your responsibility is to read the workshop submissions that are scheduled for that class, and to submit your workshop letter. The workshop letter should be just kind of your comments. Again, I'm looking for basically a minimum of 3 comments, and the minimum is absolutely fine in this case. You definitely do not need to go overboard with this, and I'll talk a little more about that in a moment. But I'm going to focus more on quality than quantity of comments in this case, and more on, again, kind of how valuable, how thought out that feedback is, as opposed to necessarily filling page space. As a very rough guideline, I would say try not to go over a half page in your feedback here, and it's fine if it's shorter. Think of this in some ways as similar to the reading response journals in terms of length and depth of these comments that you're giving to each other in the workshop letters. But with this priority of giving at least one piece of positive feedback, kind of reinforcing something that's going well in a piece, at least one piece of critical feedback, suggesting something that could be working even better, even if it is somewhat successful at this point, or something you would suggest more of by mode of expansion. As a reminder, everyone's got the opportunity to make these pieces into much larger ones for your revised draft. So if they were to expand the piece, what would you want to see more of? Not necessarily a deficiency in what we have, but what would we see even more of, or where might the story go if we continued it from the current ending? All of that kind of stuff is fair game for that. And then a third comment that can be positive, it could be more critical, or it can be kind of in between, or more of a question for the author. Really, anywhere in that spectrum is fair game, as long as there are 3 comments. And again, at least one more positive, at least one more critical, and the other one could be either or, kind of in between, or neither. So with that, I do strongly encourage you try to get those workshop letters in before we have the actual class discussion. So the reason for that is a lot of times when we start to discuss a piece in class, especially when it's a workshop draft like this, some of the early commenters, I think, have a opportunity to kind of steer the conversation. So if someone says a piece is really great and gives all these reasons, and some of them are kind of in direct opposition to what you were thinking, you might be less inclined to give that feedback now. So because either because you think maybe you were wrong about it, or there's a risk of you kind of seeming like a jerk because you're being kind of mean about a piece that someone else was just really nice about. So writing those workshop letters in advance gives you an opportunity to give kind of your objective feedback, kind of untainted by what other people thought. And if you're not sure what to say, if you're feeling confused by a piece, that in and of itself can be a good piece of critical feedback to give the author in terms of why you were confused or where you got lost in a piece or what element is kind of really challenging for you. Any of that can certainly work as well. But the feedback that you're giving, both in the comments and in the online discussion, should be focused on content of the story. And I talked about this on my last video lecture, but things like thinking about characterization, thinking about plot, thinking about setting, thinking about how the piece moves, its voice, its tone, its pacing, scenes, all of these sorts of different pieces that we've touched upon over the course of the class in reading published work. All of that is really good stuff to comment on. Please don't restrict your comments to just sort of grammatical things or mechanical things like punctuation or formatting of a document or things along those lines. If there's something really distracting or it's really detracting you from being able to understand a piece or whatnot, you can weigh in on that sort of thing, but that doesn't count as one of your 3 substantive comments in your workshop letter, and I don't want that to be the focus of our workshop discussion in class either. So it's okay to mention those things again, but don't consider that to be comments of substance in terms of the way this discussion is molded. But with the workshop letters, I'm also going to encourage you, don't try to be exhaustive with them. In part because we're going to have the full class discussion. In a spoken form, it can work to have a longer workshop letter and you cover a lot of the same things in the class discussion. In the online format, there's a real risk of just it being basically you're saying the exact same thing in the online discussion as you would in your workshop letter. So that's where at the workshop letter, I'm encouraging you to, don't feel like you have to do more than 3 substantive comments there. Save some of it for the class discussion, right? One of the advantages of this online format is each of the authors will have a transcript ready at hand of everything students are saying in the workshop discussion in a way that's really harder to keep track of in an in-person discussion. So we'll take advantage of that difference. So, again, with the workshop letters, there can be some overlap between them and what you say in the discussion board. But try to differentiate them too, right? Because the discussion board can be a good space to go back and forth and discuss ideas with each other. And whereas the workshop letter is more targeted, 3 really pointed pieces of feedback for the author themselves. And I think I alluded to this in one of our earlier videos and maybe back when we had in-person class still, but part of why I think there's value in the workshop model too is not just for the person who's having their work spoken about on that specific day, but for all of us. Because a lot of times I think it's much easier for us to recognize things that are not working so well when we see them in someone else's work as opposed to our own, because we're too close to it, or we have certain tics that we're not conscious of that might be easier to see similar things in other people's work, and then we can relay it back to our own work. So making that discussion about the pieces at hand, but also keeping in mind that this should have broader value, and we can talk about some bigger ideas in the workshop discussion as well in a way that we aren't really discussing it in our workshop letters that are more focused on the specific piece at hand. But okay, so for the meat of today's class discussion though, please do feel free to weigh in there if you do have questions that would be good for everyone to hear, or ideas about the workshop that you'd like to share with the group or maybe get feedback about. That's all fair game at this point. But more to the piece, I want to do one practice round with workshop before we go into it. In part so I can kind of gauge the discussion and weigh in and kind of put in some corrective notes if I think that we're not really getting the purpose of the workshop, and also just kind of model like to reinforce like you're doing really well, because I expect that will probably be more of the discussion, is that you're going to give really good comments, and I'll kind of reinforce, yes, this is exactly what we're looking for. And for the students who are feeling less certain about what this looks like, that might help you kind of moving forward. So in terms of the workshop piece we're going to look at, I'm attaching 2 files, if all goes as planned at least, to this same thread here where I'm leaving the video. So this is going to be writing that I personally have done. So with that, the first file you're going to have is a draft version of a story, and I'm only giving you the first 3 pages or so. This is a little bit kind of in defiance of what I asked you to do for your own workshop drafts, where I asked you to get to an ending and give a full story. The reason I wanted to do this was first and foremost, in terms of length of why I'm only giving you 3 pages, it's mostly because I didn't want to give you a whole new reading assignment at this point. I know everyone's busy, not only with this class, but other classes. So just 3 double-spaced pages, I was hoping wasn't going to be too backbreaking for anyone. So I'm going to encourage you to read that, and we'll have our workshop discussion about those 3 pages. So just imagine that those are what a student turned in. I'll be transparent. I think it has a lot of problems. I think that it has some potential and has some redeeming value for sure. But I think that it is an early draft. I think that there are a number of issues present here, or at absolute minimum, in terms of, again, that discussion of how the author could expand this thing. It's definitely not a complete story in the format that I'm giving it to you there. I do make mention that it's a piece that I wrote, so people don't go overboard and say something they might regret in terms of saying, clearly this guy has no writing skill whatsoever. So that is me. So you can temper that. But similar to the workshop with your classmates, right? We want to be respectful of the author while also giving them the benefit of our honest feedback and and critique here. So this is an exercise to get practice with giving workshop style feedback. You do not need to write workshop letters in response to this piece. In fact, please don't. I'm not looking for that, but rather just to kind of have the discussion in the discussion thread, and again, so I can just kind of reinforce what we're doing well already and kind of right the ship if there are things that I feel we want to straighten out before we get into the actual workshop, starting with our next class and the pieces you'll be reading for next time. So with that, the second file that I'm including, I'm also including the more final version of this piece. So to give some context, the original draft of this I wrote, I think 2010, 2011, somewhere in that ballpark. The piece was actually published about, whatever it was, about 5 years later, many drafts later. So I think if you look at the two, you'd see that there's significant overlap, but there's also, even just from those opening pages, significant differences. And I would say, for those who do want to look at it, the 3 pages I'm giving you more or less correspond to the first 2 pages of the actual published story, so you can see where the similarities and differences are. And for those who are interested, you can read the rest if you like. There's no obligation to read the published story. It's one of my values, actually, as a teacher, that I never assign students to read anything that I have published, just because I feel like that's not really fair of me to do. That sort of feels, if at the least, kind of self-congratulatory, especially when there's so much other great literature out there. So I'm sharing my work more in the vein of just as something we can openly critique, so I'm not subjecting any other writer to that. And B, to just kind of demonstrate progress, right? And kind of, again, to be transparent, I don't think that the first draft I'm sharing with you is terrible, but I also think it does have serious problems, and to show, even as someone who I consider myself a little bit further along in my writing career, still, like anyone, I have first drafts, right? And I don't think that they're nearly as good as the published work that ultimately results from them. So again, so that roughly 3-page PDF, that's what I want you to read and comment on in the discussion thread below. And I'll give a space for positive feedback, as well as critical feedback, as well as to kind of space in between questions, etc. And so we can have kind of a practice workshop with that, and I'll kind of, again, reinforce what's working well and what's not working as well from there. And then again, the other longer PDF, completely optional for you to read. Again, I just want to have it there as an opportunity so you can see kind of how a piece might change. To be transparent, this piece went through, I think, 2 separate, more official workshops, and then also just more of my independent revision and showing it to individual, colleagues and friends, and kind of getting their feedback. So but you can see kind of the roots of a piece and kind of what it grew into over time, if you're so inclined. As an in-between space, again, if you just want to look at the first couple pages to match them up to the draft version I gave you, that can be useful. But ultimately, don't feel a need to really read that PDF. Again, it's there if you want it, if you're interested in it. But it's not an assignment. I'm not asking for any comments necessarily on it. We'll focus on the workshop draft of it for our practice workshop purposes. Okay, so I think that's just about all for this time. So again, please feel free to weigh in the comments again with your feedback about the sample draft I'm giving you. You can start reading the work that your peers gave you. Again, I'm going to label something like workshop pieces 1. I put the date on it as well. So you have that for your official homework for next time and to write your workshop letters. And then starting Wednesday, we'll start having the discussions of those. And again, I'm going to lean back from doing these video lectures during the workshop period, which will last for whatever it is, a good, I think almost 3 weeks of class or so, roughly speaking. So you won't see me for a little while in these videos. I'm sure none of you mind that too much. But I'll really look forward to these workshop discussions and conversing with you about all of that. So, all right, thanks for watching, and I'll talk to you all soon.